Hey guys, we've gotten 5 brand new polls that have come out over the past couple of days taking a look at the 2020 Democratic primary race. If you're interested in looking at all of these articles and data sets for yourself, I'll have links posted down in the video description. Jumping right into it here, starting off with Ipsos, Joe Biden leading the pack at 22% of support, followed by Sanders at 15%, and Elizabeth Warren in third at 11%. All of the other candidates are in mid to lower single digits, where you have Buttigieg at 6%, and Kamala at 4%, and then it goes down from there. But also with this Ipsos poll, they asked issue and policy-related questions and which candidate they felt was the best on each particular topic. Now, maybe not surprising to a lot of you guys, but Bernie Sanders leading the pack on pretty much every policy-related issue. But then when you translate that over to asking who people are actually going to vote for in the primary, then he came in second place. But I just wanted to run through this list. So they asked, of these candidates, who do you think is the best on this particular issue? So then first they asked immigration. Bernie Sanders leading here at 16%. Then they asked on the issue of healthcare. This is where Bernie Sanders did his best, leading the pack at 24%. And then they asked who's the best on the environment. Bernie Sanders in first at 20%. Who's the best on the economy and jobs? Again, Bernie Sanders in first place at 20%. But then they asked who is the most likely to beat President Trump in the general election. This is where Biden did his best, up there in first place at 29%, followed by Sanders at 16%. And this is kind of the narrative we get in the mainstream media, or just establishment Democratic figures in general, where they say Biden is the safest head-to-head matchup against Trump, given the fact that he's more of a moderate and to the center, so he's not going to alienate these centrist-type voters. But basically what we see in the polls in terms of general election matchups between Sanders and Trump, Biden and Trump, and Warren and Trump, there's not all that much of a difference, especially when you take a look at the similarities between Sanders and Biden, or even we see more strengths from Sanders in some of these key Midwestern states from the polls that we see in terms of those head-to-head matchups. So I don't know if this argument necessarily holds a ton of water, but when we take a look at the general scope across the board from all these different polls, Biden tends to do a little bit better in his head-to-head matchup against Trump, but not all that much, and that is without going through, obviously, campaigning and debating season, going head-to-head against Trump, and how he might have weaknesses in terms of that potential scenario, in contrast to maybe what a Sanders or a Warren might be able to bring to the table in terms of a more populist message. We saw this back in 2016, where it was in the 2016 primary, Sanders' populist message against Hillary Clinton's centrist message, and people felt like Hillary Clinton, in the same way back in 2016, wouldn't alienate those centrist voters, and she would be a tougher matchup against Trump, even though that went against actually what the polling was saying at the time. And then that strategy ended up failing for the Democrats in 2016, with Trump able to eke out those key Midwestern states, where here in 2020, it feels like we're kind of going down the same path. We'll see what happens at the end of the day, but still those voters are feeling like going with that centrist approach and going with a more establishment figure like Joe Biden is still the way to go in terms of the best head-to-head matchup against Trump, and perhaps why he's still winning in terms of the overall primary vote, even though Sanders is leading the pack on all of these policy specifics when asking these particular voters. And then some other questions that we have here. So they asked who is a strong progressive, and Bernie Sanders leads that one at 18, followed by Warren at 16. And then one question where actually Buttigieg led the pack, and that was the final question. We'll get to that next. But the next one was, can you unify the Democratic Party? Biden there at 19, Bernie at 16. And then they asked the last question here, a new and a different voice. That was Buttigieg at 14%, followed by Sanders and Warren, who were each at 13 percentage points, respectively. So some really interesting data out of this Ipsos poll, and the one that I wanted to spend the most time on, given how they went about doing this particular poll and asking those different questions. So now moving on over to the Economist and YouGov, where we have Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren, basically co-frontrunners in this one at 26 and 25 percentage points, respectively, followed by Bernie Sanders in third place at 14%. And this is actually a little bit of a step forward for Sanders in this Economist YouGov poll from where we had seen him, while Elizabeth Warren taking just a little bit of a step back, where she had the outright lead and now 1 percentage point behind Biden in this one. And then all the other candidates in single digits, where you have Buttigieg at 8%, Kamala Harris at 6%, and then all the other candidates at 3 percentage points or less. And then they also asked who would be your second choice among these candidates and options, and Warren came in first at 14, followed by Sanders at 10, and then Joe Biden there in third place at 9 percentage points in terms of the second choice among these Democratic presidential primary or caucus voters. Moving over to Monmouth University, and a really positive poll for Sanders and Buttigieg camp in particular, because Sanders gained 5 percentage points from where he was back in September at 15, now up to 20, and then Buttigieg was at 5 percentage points in September, now up to 9 percentage points. So some big gains there for Sanders and Buttigieg respectively, while Biden and Warren taking a step back towards Bernie Sanders. So Biden was at 25, now down to 23. Elizabeth Warren was at 28, now down to 23. So receding 5 percentage points was Elizabeth Warren, and essentially a statistical tie at the top when you take in the margin of error into account, basically a three-way race between Biden, Warren, and Sanders with this national poll from Monmouth University that actually just came out today. All right, 2 more polls, and both of these came out just a little bit before the first 3 polls that I went over in this video. So this is this week's morning consult, and we can see basically no change from where we were a week ago, where Biden leading the pack at 32%, followed by Sanders and Warren each at 20 percentage points respectively, and then all the other candidates again in single digits, where you have Buttigieg at 7%, Harris at 5%, and Andrew Yang at 3%, and then all the rest are at 2 percentage points or less. And then those early primary states, Biden leading at 33, followed by Sanders at 22, and then Warren at 17. And not a great poll here from Pete Buttigieg in terms of those early states, because a lot of these state-specific polls, specifically Iowa and New Hampshire, we see Buttigieg performing a little bit better than what his national numbers might indicate. So that's already 2 out of the 4 early primary states that these numbers are taking into account. And the fact that he's only at 7 percentage points, not necessarily a great look. And Buttigieg like to see those numbers doing a little bit better here in the morning consult early primary states. And then also an outlier is Tom Steyer at 6%, and he's pumping a ton of money and funds into advertising into these early primary states. You can see it's having somewhat of effect where he's at 6% in those early states compared to his national numbers where he's almost non-existent in his support. And then we have the Echelon Insights, where more of a positive poll here for Biden and Warren in particular. So Biden up 2 percentage points to 32. Warren up 11 percentage points up to 22% of support compared to the August numbers. Sanders down 4 percentage points to 15. Buttigieg up 3 points to 6. Kamala Harris down 6 percentage points down to 5. And then all the other candidates at 2 percentage points or less. And you can see how the support of these different candidates are driven. So for Biden, it's driven by seniors. For Warren, it's driven by whites with bachelor's degrees, so college-educated whites essentially. Bernie Sanders is driven by voters under the age of 30. With Buttigieg, his support is driven by suburban voters, and Kamala Harris driven by African-American voters. Not any surprises that I find out of that particular list. Actually, I'd probably guess that that was going to be all of the top supporter groups of these individuals, even if I hadn't seen the numbers beforehand. Basically, these are what we're getting across the board in poll after poll, where these groups are kind of carrying these respective candidates and where they do the best in their individual segments of the Democratic Party. So those were the 5 polls that I wanted to touch on in today's video. A very mixed bag overall, some really interesting numbers, and kind of seeing this contrast of where we were maybe a month or 2 ago with the polls and what's the updated data telling us. And I'm going to continue going over all this data as we get closer and closer to the first early primary and caucus states, which is going to be towards the beginning of the 2020 year. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and I hope to see you guys back here for my next video.